Good evening and welcome to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen Workshop. It is June 27th, 2019. We will have the prayer will be with Catherine Green and the Pledge of Allegiance will be with Vice Mayor Brown. You should all have the minutes. We'll have one presentation with the Tennessee Strikers. Old business, second reading ordinance 2019-21, an ordinance to amend Title 8, Chapter 2 of the Vergne Municipal Code regarding the sale of alcoholic beverages for on-premise consumption. This was discussed last month. Anyone have any questions about it? Second reading ordinance 2019-22, an ordinance to amend Title 9 of the Vergne Municipal Code regarding mobile food vendors. Again, this was discussed at length last month. Any questions about it? Second reading, ordinance 2019-23, an ordinance to amend Title 20, Chapter 2, Section 20-208 of the Vergne Municipal Code regarding parks and recreation user fees. Does anyone have any questions? Moving on to the consent agenda. First item we have is bid McFarland Elevated Water Storage Tank Improvements. Jamie?
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Aldermen. On June 18th, 2019 at 1:30 p.m. Here at City Hall, we opened bids for the McFarland Elevated Water Storage Tank Improvements Project. There were 3 bids submitted, publicly opened and read aloud. The parent low bidder was Utility Service Company out of Perry, Georgia, with a total bid amount of $303,000. Utility Service Company's Tennessee contractor's license is active and appears to be in order. We would recommend award of this project to Utility Service in the amount of the $303,000. Do you all have any questions?
Well, first I want to say I'm glad to see it's definitely under what we had budgeted for it. I remember last year we discussed some foundation issues. Can you elaborate what y'all found with that?
Yes, sir. We had a structural engineer come in and do an assessment on the foundation, and they provided a report, and everything checked out that the cracking that we saw was due to advanced freeze-thaw due to some moisture around the foundation. There's a couple sources up there. Those have already been extended away so that that moisture isn't constantly pouring out onto the foundation in the area. And then as part of this project, it will be permanently installed, and we are also, we included in the project scope to have those areas that were spalled and cracked to be repaired with a grout, and then the entire foundation will have a coating system applied to that to prevent future issues.
Good. Thank you.
If this gets passed, what kind of ETA are they looking at?
Utility Service can get started right away to take this tank out of service. The pump station has a little bit of prep work, so coordinating all the subs on that and getting the system ready to go so that everybody has adequate water. The prep work on that, I think we're looking at probably mid-August. Before they'll actually take it out of service to start.
And the impact of, I guess, the residents on the 303,000, is that not counting the man hours and equipment it takes to get the water set back up?
That's inclusive.
That's inclusive. Okay,
yes,
great.
sir. Mm-hmm.
Good job.
And this is something that those residents have been contacting City Hall about quite a bit, asking when that would get repainted and repaired. So good job. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Moving on to item number 2, Sourcewell contract purchase, auto and truck parts. This is where we're going, I believe, from Napa to, or we're going Napa to Sourcewell contract through the NJPA.
Where is that? What is that? Sourcewell.
Sourcewell is this is like a state contract.
It's a cooperative purchasing group that we do purchase things from. Our current vendor, we've had some issues with, especially when it comes to billing. So we're going to try and go with a different vendor, which is Napa, through the Sourcewell contract that they bid out.
Would that be, Garland, be able to use the local Napa?
Yes.
Yes, this is the one.
Oh, okay, good,
Yeah, I think we've been using O'Reilly's, right?
okay.
Okay.
So we still keep it in our city?
Yes, yes. It's not a Napa, just, got it.
Gotcha.
Okay, moving on to B, approve change order number 2, commercial and industrial water meter replacement project. Mr. Dietz.
Afternoon. While we was still in the warranty period of the commercial and industrial meter project, we discovered that there were 6 locations that needed additional work. The additional work included installing testable backflow devices, piping, fitting, pits, etc. Worked with the contractor to complete the work. The additional cost to the contract was $44,300. Brought the total contract price to a total of $307,000, which was still under the original contract by a total of $682,325. This change order number 2 is essentially just a check and balance to close out the project.
That's something that they, I recently went to a class for utility board training. That's what they were talking about with the water meters, where, especially with the industrial and commercial, big factories, you'll find that, hey, you have to go in and do other work besides just the meter.
Yes, sir, there was many, many variables throughout this project.
Any other questions? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, sir. And I have to say it, anchor down.
Yeah, buddy.
Moving on to new business. First reading ordinance 2019-24, an ordinance to amend the fiscal year 2018-2019 general fund budget. Your senior packets, it's covering everything from the health insurance for the legislative board, transportation equipment with the fire department, some THDA, maintenance, and some other things. Any questions?
We actually learned some of this last weekend.
Wonderful. Moving on, first reading ordinance 2019-25, an ordinance to amend fiscal year 2018-2019 State Street Aid Fund budget. This is for repair and maintenance to roads, about $70,000. Any questions?
So do we have a direction where we're going with that money, Garm? Is it repair to our existing roads? Do we have an area that we focus on?
No,
This was already done work.
Oh, it's work already done?
Yeah. This was actually paving that we did for the year, and we went over approximately 70,000. About 35 of it was a July invoice where we had tried to get the work done in the prior fiscal year, and they weren't able to actually get to the work until July, so it got billed out in July. So that's about half of it is because of an old invoice or an old project or a road that got paid right after year end last year.
So it's from 2018 or 2017 budget?
It would have been the 2017-18 budget. 35 of it was that from there, and about 35 from this fiscal year budget.
Does that happen a lot?
Yes, in paving it does, because not only is it paving, it's, when we buy salt, if we have to buy additional salt in a fiscal year that we weren't prepared for, if Garland's doing a bunch of guardrail repair or just maintenance that we didn't anticipate, it's pretty common. Every year we have pretty much do budget amendments for State Street Aid.
Street lighting comes out of this too, right?
Yeah, street lighting. but
Street lights.
And
All right, thank you.
guardrails. First reading ordinance 2019-26, an ordinance to amend the fiscal year 2018 senior citizen fund budget. This is $21,600 repair and maintenance to the building.
This was when we had early on, the senior center had a sewer backup, I believe it was. And we filed an insurance claim and received about $21,000 toward the repair. And this is just to do the year-end cleanup to balance the revenues and the expenses.
So the 21,000 is what we're needing, and is that also what the insurance paid?
Now, the insurance paid 21,000, and basically we only took about $600 out of the fund, out of the senior fund balance for that whole cleanup.
So us making the, I guess the amendment, is that to pay back the 21,000?
No,
No.
this is just to update our budgets to reflect the expenses and the revenues. This has already been paid for with the insurance proceeds.
Okay. Thank you.
First reading, ordinance 2019-27, an ordinance to amend the fiscal year 2018-2019 Streets Capital Projects Fund budget. This is the Old Nashville Highway widening industrial boulevard right-of-way. Any questions?
So the widening of that, but that wasn't done in this year, right?
That's the study, I believe. Is that
Okay.
right, Phyllis?
Engineering,
The technical side of it?
That was the same report we just got back a couple weeks ago, or a couple months ago.
But that guy that came up here
Yes.
and told us about all, okay, I got you.
First reading ordinance 2019-28, an ordinance to amend the fiscal year 2018-2019 Parks Capital Projects Fund budget. This is 7,600, looks like 4,100 is Hurricane Creek Greenway, and then 35 is professional services. Any questions?
What are the professional services?
This was a professional service associated with the Greenway. There was also a declined reimbursement from the state, and this was included in these numbers because we didn't get we get 80/20 on the Hurricane Creek reimbursement, and there was one invoice that it was that last bit of paving that we decided to do. I think it was $3,800, and our part of it was 20-something hundred. But they did decline to reimburse us for that.
And their reason for declining it was what?
It wasn't part of the scope of the project, and that, they did an amendment, and this was not part of that amendment. I think we actually did some extra paving at the very end to get it.
Remember, one time we had that damage too after that storm.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of this is related to that.
Yeah, it is.
So the damage, did the insurance pick up any of that?
No.
Yeah, I don't think it would have been on yet because we hadn't, at that point, signed off on the Greenway back then. First reading ordinance 2019-29, an ordinance to amend Title 15, Chapter 8, Section 15-801 of the Laverne Municipal Code regarding the adoption of state traffic statutes. This is essentially to get us in line with the state when it comes to as far as being able to cite tickets. Is that right, Bruce?
Yes, sir. We're basically updating the various chapters of TCA Title 55. There were several sections that had been left out previously, so we were redoing the traffic citations and realized that we needed to actually, adopt some of these things. So this is really more of a cleanup item than anything, but it just updates that chapter on what we're adopting by reference.
Thank you.
So if we don't do this, Chief, does this mean you can't write us tickets?
For the most part, that's correct. If it's for something that wasn't contained in the cited TCA that's in the existing ordinance. But this brings us up to speed with everything that's changed since the last time, like Class C misdemeanors with a civil fine not in excess of 50. Anything that in all of these chapters in Title 55, we can issue a citation for it without it being a specific city ordinance. And we can list those. And then it also covers us, the language is in there too, that covers us if the state code is amended, then
It automatically
if it
adopts.
adds to or deletes, then it's automatically deleted or added.
Thank you.
First reading ordinance 2019-30, an ordinance to amend Title 15 and Title 3 of the Laverne Municipal Code regarding electronic traffic citation regulations and fees. Essentially, this is where it was discussed at the planning retreat with the e-citation, there is the ability to add a $5 fee to each citation, and this is, if this goes into effect, it's slated for September 1st and would go no longer than September 1st of 2024. So only a 5-year period. And this is to recoup that money that's spent on this program.
And you budgeted the money as a capital item for 1920. It was passed.
Thank you, Chief. Any other questions? First reading ordinance 2019-31, an ordinance to amend Title 15, Chapter 6 of the Laverne Municipal Code regarding parking. And this is specifically adding language in there to the street parking prohibited, referencing to look at section 15-601, and it mentions street parking is not allowed except for whenever it strictly conforms with PDR developments, design book requirements for on-street parking as adopted and approved by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
Hey, Garland, I have a question for you. Across the street from Dunkin' Donuts there, when you make that left-hand turn, there's a private property lot there, and it's got 2 no parking signs. Is that something that the city put up, or is that, are we,
I put them there because we couldn't get it. There's asphalt goes back about 10 or 15 feet. And we couldn't get in. We just put it there for no parking.
so do we, is that something that's common to put on private property? Okay. I just want to be careful. If we're policing private property, we're going to have to police everyone's private property. And I seen that was turning into truck parking quite a bit, so I understand the reasoning for it, but I don't know if that's something that we have to be concerned with or not.
Well, that wouldn't fall with this ordinance.
No, I don't think it has anything to do with the ordinance, but it's parking on the side of the road, and I see city signs on the private property, so that's what my concern was.
Okay. First reading ordinance 2019-32, an ordinance to amend the Laverne zoning ordinance to increase the allowed building height in certain zoning districts. This received a favorable recommendation from the Planning Commission on June 25th, 2019. This is where in commercially zoned areas, the height restriction would be raised to 6 stories or 75 feet. And this could help as far as trigger some redevelopment, especially with our hotels. That was some of the thought with that, where we all hear that there's no shortage of needed hotel space here in Middle Tennessee with all the activities in Nashville. So this hopefully will spur a little bit of redevelopment, as well as you'll see some hotels come in. Puts us kind of on an even footpath with Smyrna as well, because they already have that. Any questions? Resolution 2019-14, a resolution electing directors of the Industrial Development Board for the City of Laverne. And let me hop over to that. This is a board we've been working on trying to get together for quite a while, and this is, again, something we already see in other cities here in Rutherford County, and this allows us that if we would like to set up a TIF district or any type of incentives to encourage redevelopment, new development, it would be able to.
Would this board have following some of the state literature that's out there floating around, would this board have the means to purchase property
No.
for the city?
No, that would still have to go through the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
And what would this board, what would their role play in the city on the economic development side?
Well, they would be board members of the IDB, so they would vote on and discuss any types of TIF districts, incentives to bring in new business, those sort of things.
And there's areas, there's certain properties that the city can't buy. Would this board be able to purchase any land?
Again, no, this board, the IDB doesn't have that authority. That's the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
Would they have any banking relationships?
What do you mean by banking relationships?
I mean, would this board have any banking relationships?
I don't understand. What do you mean by banking relationships?
Do they have relationships with any of our current banks that may be interested in purchasing property in the city limits of Laverne?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you.
So would this board report to us, or would they report to planning, or would they report to economic? Who would they report to?
Bruce, do you want to go through that?
It is a separate entity from the city. This is not a city board. This is not a city, entity. It is its own, has its own authority as regulated by Tennessee Code Annotated. I'm not well-versed enough on it to be able to explain everything to you, but we have been going through this process for quite some time. But I do know on certain things, they do have to get permission from the Board of Mayor and Aldermen on various incentive packages, depending on what is being offered. But this board, the IDB can approve various incentives, to retail or industrial, or whatever the case may be.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, the mayor mentioned TIF districts, tax increment financing. Basically, you would take the value of the property before the improvement and then the value after the improvement, and, you would pay back the difference over the course of a certain number of years with the sales taxes that you would recoup from that. So,
Or with property taxes?
right. So, it's just a way to offer an incentive to bring somebody in here, to generate more sales tax for Laverne.
Is there a consultant or somebody that we can, as you stated, you're not up to speed on this either?
I'm not an expert on it by any
Right.
stretch of the means.
Is there somebody
have
we
been-
can-
We have been working with Tom Trent, who is an attorney out of Nashville,
Okay.
in putting this together. I'm sure Tom Broker knows a lot about it as well. I know he's taken several classes on it, but obviously he's not here tonight, so.
Is it possible that we can defer this until we can meet with them?
There can be a motion at the meeting, and we can always reach out to Tom Broker and Tom Trent and see if they can attend Tuesday night's meeting.
That would be good.
That's a good idea.
That'd
So
be-
you mentioned that these were in other cities. Were they beneficial to the other cities?
It depends on how they use them, but yes, they can be.
Yeah, there's positives and negatives we've seen.
Whenever we're talking about sales tax abatement and property tax abatement, it's not just the cities either. This encompasses the county as well, so, which would be 3/4 of it.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Trying to educate me.
Resolution 2019-15, a resolution of the City of Laverne Board of Mayor and Aldermen to declare property owned to be by the city to be surplus to the needs and directing disposal of the same. Like, this is various items from IT and fire department. Moving on to motion to appoint or remove board and committee members. We have some terms expiring for the Economic Development Advisory Committee. We have 3 terms up. We have Graham Coates, Nathaniel Holtzman, and Tom Clark's term has come up. We have heard back from Graham and Nathaniel. Both would like to remain on this board. And Tom Clark notified us today that just due to his business commitments, he will be stepping down from this board. So his position will be advertised on Channel 3 for people to submit applications. Then number 20, discussion, employee dress code guidelines. Alderman Church.
This is something that I reached out to a couple department heads, just getting some advice. Different departments have contacted me on the dress code. It's about tattoos. And they feel that many members of our team, whether it be police department, fire department, public works, Parks and Rec, that it's not, what we have in place isn't fair. And I told him I would address the board and bring it to the mayor's attention if you could help us. I've talked to the chief of police, and I asked what was his opinion on tattoos, and we had a great conversation, and it's about the first thing you see, when someone gets out of the car, appearance. I spoke to the fire chief also. He had some of the same things, but in a different aspect. I've spoken to different members of the community. The dress code that we have in place, our surrounding cities, the police departments, fire departments, society has changed. I don't know if it's a good move or a bad move. I gave my word that I'd bring it up to the board. However, I think if we're going to enforce this code, if you're a law enforcement and you get out of the car and you have tattoos and you are required to wear long sleeve shirts, or if you work in City Hall, you have to wear long sleeve shirts. The questions are, if you have a tattoo on your ankle, can you wear a skirt, or can you wear shorts? Or if you have a tattoo, where do we stop controlling that? That's where I'm trying to understand myself. I don't know that it makes a difference. If there's a tattoo on your arm, can they still put your fire out? I feel confident that they can. If the police officer has a tattoo, it works both ways. Like the chief's example was, your appearance. Well, if there's someone jumps out of a cop car and this board's sitting there, and they have tattoos all over them, there's not a lot of us up here with tattoos. But if you're the person sitting in the car and you have tattoos and your sleeves are, it's perception too. So I feel if the citizens, we're not the ones, we're not allowed to and we're not supposed to profile someone because of their appearance. So I think it should go both ways too. And I would like to see this board be a little more fair. If we have tattoos and they're seen, if they're seen on your arm, it's the same situation on their legs. They need to be covered up. Or we need to allow the folks that have tattoos on their arms, they should be shown if it's not offensive. And when I say offensive, do we who judges that? Well, we're already judging people. If a couple examples were, if you have a certain flag on your arm, well, some people say that the flag may be hatred, and we don't want any member of our city to feel violated because of a flag. But on the same token, if they have a cross on their arm, what's the difference?
What if the person is an atheist?
In this country, you can worship any person you want to. I prefer worshiping my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ because that's my right. And I don't know who Steve Noe worships. If Steve Noe worships somebody else, that's Steve Noe's right. And I feel that it's important that as a government agency, we should especially treat our staff equal. And I guess it would be a city administrator and HR, but I feel it's a little irresponsible for us to hold somebody at law enforcement, you can't wear this, but yet we allow somebody in other departments, to show tattoos. And to keep us out of trouble, that's why I brought it to the board's attention. And hopefully we can find a compromise, or either we allow it or we don't allow it, and it has to come across the board.
Well, I've got two things here. Number one, the actual wording of the personnel policy states, tattoos shall not be obscene and in keeping with a professional image, when possible, should not be visible. It's cut and dry on that. It's not saying that it's allowed in certain areas or.
Oh, no, I agree.
It's cut and dry,
So if you have them on your legs,
Hold on. And then the other part is, this is part of the personnel policy, which is what we're already outsourcing to have reviewed, and we're waiting on getting a version of that back. So if this board can review it and make and suggest any changes before adopting it.
so how does this board feel today? Because we have rules in place, and we're buying uniforms for different departments right now, long sleeve uniforms. And that's really put the topic on, on the table. These employees are going, if we're gonna be allowed to go short sleeve, we don't need to buy long sleeve uniforms for the winter, for the summer, because they get a summer attire and a winter group. So at some level, the board has to make a decision what's okay. If we're saying tonight, you can have tattoos, they can't be obscene, then we need to allow that. If we're not, we need to say, if you have tattoos and you need to wear pants, if you have them on your legs or if you have them on, I don't know how this board is going to be able to justify it both ways. And I don't think it's fair to staff to try to implement those rules and keep those rules when they're struggling with the decision, well, what is the rule?
This doesn't make an allowance for it. It's saying that when possible should not be visible. So it's saying it, again, should not be visible. So that's current policy. I would say most of our employees, whenever they were onboarded with the city, came in under this already. So they knew their policies are given the handbook. They're supposed to read through it beforehand. So that was, part of what they knew and expected coming to work for the city. And for me, it's a profession. It's professional image. That's what, you said Chief Clark, Chief Walker, both in their own unique ways went to. So that's my thoughts.
Well, it's split. The police chief, Chief Walker, he feels that they need to be covered. Chief Clark doesn't have a problem with it. So I didn't say that, but I just wanted to use that as an example. That's a good example with what you just said. We have two departments that are in front of everybody 100% of the time. They're in front of people more than we are that feels they have two different opinions. So it's up to this board to say, hey, this is what it is. But it goes all the way down to Parks and Recreation, senior citizens, every department, Public Works. I would think if we're going to have the rule needs to be implemented across the board.
Well, that's what that email, I believe, was for. That was sent out about a week ago. Maybe a little bit more was sent citywide and is there to make everyone aware, in case they've forgotten or gotten lax on it, that this is the policy, that they should adhere to
So
it.
the policy is they don't need to be visible.
This policy's right here on, what page is this? It's right here in your packet where it says tattoos shall not be obscene and in keeping with a professional image when possible should not be visible. The exact wording.
So for me, I'll just say I don't mind seeing someone with tattoos. It doesn't bother me at all. But I think that there's a little bit of a scary part, and that is what is obscene to one person, it's subjective. So what is obscene to one person is perfectly fine to another. I'm not easily offended. There's not much that would shock or dismay me. Other people really do get offended seeing things, and so I think that's kind of the gray area that we're trying to avoid. Personally, I hate to see our officers or firemen wearing long sleeves in the summertime. They look hot and miserable, like they're burning up. Are they hiding some, American flag tattoo or something that, is not offensive? I don't know. I don't have a problem with tattoos personally at all, but until this dress code is changed, or unless it's changed, we need to enforce it unanimously as it's written. And then if it's changed, I don't have any problem with changing it. It needs to be unanimously, equally distributed throughout the personnel, no matter what their title is.
Chief Walker, do you have something you want to chime in on?
I do. For one thing, as law enforcement officers, whether we like it or not, we're held to a higher standard than pretty much anybody with the exception of clergy. And clergy gets away with more than we can sometimes. For example, Brady and Giglio, federal opinions from U.S. courts. If we have someone who falsifies something, they can no longer be, and we verify it and it's factual, they can no longer be a law enforcement officer for this reason. They can't go into court, raise their right hand, and make an oath, swear or affirm. Based on that, they could never go into federal court. We have to identify to each federal court that we have not had an internal investigation with falsification of any sort, lying, telling the truth, etc. In any internal investigation in anything that we have. So whether we like it or not, we're always held to a higher standard than most everybody else. Many professions, I don't want to pick any out particularly, but to give examples, if a school teacher is charged with DUI, they're not necessarily losing their teacher license for that. If an attorney is arrested, charged DUI, they don't necessarily lose their license. A nurse, a doctor, and I'll go on and on. A law enforcement officer can't be there. Can't be there in any manner whatsoever. The reason when I came, I told them that we were going to cover tattoos is simply because there's one thing, and that's the appearance. The book is, what do they see when they see you coming? It's a book that was written by Stephen F. Gower. And matter of fact, the books were printed down here at Ingram. But Stephen has been for many, many years not only a United Methodist minister, studied in Emory, et cetera. He was a captain in the U.S. Army for a while, and he's been a motivational speaker for a long, long time. What do they see when they see you coming? When you get out of that car, what is it? Your demeanor, your appearance, your language, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If y'all hadn't paid attention, in the last week there have been 5 law enforcement officers shot and killed, not counting the ones run over and other things that occurred too. We have to be as plain Jane neutral as we can be, as much as any profession anywhere. It's a little different for fire because there are some things we have to stand up to, some tests that they don't, but they still have whatever, and I'm going to leave that to Chris. I'm not saying that any other city employee shouldn't be allowed to. I'm not saying that they shouldn't or should. I'm saying as far as police department is concerned, we have restrictions on our personnel that other agencies and other city departments, county departments, industry, et cetera, has on them. And we have to maintain that standard. Now, the other problem is if we open it up, who's going to decide what's offensive or abusive in nature or insulting in nature? Because there's so many things out there, people can come out of the woodwork for anything and everything now. And what concerns me is if we open it up, somebody's going to say, well, you didn't let me do it because of this one I've got, because you said it was possibly offensive or insulting, etc. So there comes a lawsuit there. But on the other hand, if we arrest Joe, John, Jane out there and they say, well, that offends me, I'm going to sue. Well, they may not collect, but in today's world, who knows? People collect for off-the-wall stuff all the time. And it costs us money to represent as well. So that's where I'm coming from. We have to have a different standard. I'm sorry.
So, Chief, can I ask you one question? If you pull somebody over as the police chief and you walk up to the car and they have tattoos, does your judgment change?
No, my judgment doesn't change on them because I have to be down the middle. I don't judge people by what they look like, act like, are like, by their religion or anything else. I can't. I have to be straight down the middle. That's the reason I hate anything concerning partisan politics or politics at all has no place in law enforcement, point blank. You probably will never know how I vote. I don't talk about it. I never have, because I don't care what your politics are.
Right.
I'm going to say this. My faith tells me that I'm to treat everybody alike. Love them no matter what. And I do to that point in time that I have to put them in jail or whatever I have to do. But I've got to be down the middle of the road. I can't be a little bit one side of that center line either way. And I'm sorry, that's the way it is.
So what do you think the average citizen feels when they see law enforcement in Laverne?
Well, some of them hate us.
Think they judge
Some of them love us. Others are just don't care.
Right.
All you got to do is read Facebook.
Yeah.
We put a 72-hour sticker that was a warning for parking on the street, and people were going nuts about it. It was a ticket, and no, I mean, it was a warning.
Right.
And someone else that was in that area said that vehicle was parked on the street, but nothing was in the driveway. Why didn't they just pull it into the driveway?
They actually said SWAT was sent out. That's what.
Pardon me?
If you read the comments on down, they actually said SWAT was sent to the house.
SWAT my foot. And our people hate having to write parking tickets, but they also hate going and answering calls because of kids going across the imaginary line where the yard is to pick up a ball that went 5 feet in somebody's yard. Call the police. They also call for this and that and the other, all kinds of off-the-wall things we hate to have to go to. Loud music, for example. Neighbors can't get along, arguing about this, that, or the other. Parking. If it's blocking the road and emergency services vehicles can't get through, then we will warn normally. We don't like to do it. We don't write tickets. I don't care what anybody on this board tells me. We're not going to write tickets for revenue. That's not why we do it. We do it for changing attitudes to make our streets and roadways safer.
So getting back to this policy, who dictates this policy? The administration or the board?
This would go, once we have the personnel policy back, that whole personnel policy would be recommended changes and voted upon.
So it sounds to me like we need to wait on that, but it also sounds like probably some departments are okay with it, some others are not, and as Vice Mayor Brown says, we live in a world of, I want to say one word, but I can't. Just people get so offended about certain things, and what's not offensive to me is offensive to somebody else. But it sounds like whatever the rule is, that's what it needs to be across the board, and be.
If we can get legal to just verify for us, maybe the next day or two, or of course next week, do we have any repercussions from staff as our policy is written for having tattoos? Or are we treating them any different? Are we treating them unfairly? If we can just make sure, because we don't want that to happen. This was brought up because of an interest from staff. It's not a demand. It's not even a request. It was a topic subject.
Yeah, and it's a good topic, but I think Chief Walker's got a good point.
Yeah, it's a valid point.
I think Chief Clark would like to weigh in, and
For just a second, our standard operating guidelines at the fire department defines when they can take their uniform shirt off, because we wear uniform T-shirts underneath it, and that's at 5 o'clock in the station. During that period of time, they are to keep their uniforms on. If they go out on a medical call, they have to put their uniforms on, whether it's short sleeve or long sleeve. However, if they have tattoos, they have to cover them. A lot of people would say, well, we don't care if your tattoos are showing or not if you're having a heart attack. And that may be true. But they may care if they're out here getting groceries at Kroger to do their, to cook their supper. So we put our policy says that at 5 o'clock, or 1700 hours, 5 o'clock, that they could remove that outer uniform shirt while they're exercising there at the station or under their turnouts. So they can wear their turnouts under, their T-shirts underneath that turnouts. We were directing traffic the other night. They had their turnouts on, but they had their T-shirt on. It was raining. It was nasty. So we do have these in place. In that guideline or the policy for the city, it says when possible. Well, when we do impossible, if we do not, we need to define that. Because my guys will say, anytime's impossible.
Right.
I love them. I love them with all my heart. But
Can't
if we
blame 'em.
don't define that to the T, then, we kind of set ourselves up for failure.
Yeah.
Tell you a little story and I'm going to stop. I was in Cozumel for 2 years ago, and myself and my wife were sitting there and was at, I think it's called an infinity pool. And I look out, and there's a bunch of people there. And I told her we were a minority. And she said, what do you mean? I said, we're the only ones here that ain't got a tattoo. Society has changed. So, whatever that policy may be, we make sure those policies are followed. So, I'll probably have a different debate than Chief Walker. But here's the deal. We need to define that policy, and we need to define it to the period at the end.
But
Make
it
sure
does
that we're
not.
all there.
It does not need to be a blanket city policy.
Correct.
Because there are so many things we have that are much more strict than what the regular policy says.
So
Because
David
of
and
the
Garland,
nature of
what
the
do you
beast.
think with your guys, the way you all work outside and, your job, not saying that their jobs are not just as,
Absolutely.
but
It's hot out there, it's hard to work something local. This night I've seen, I think when I talked to
Yeah.
Matt yesterday, I told him, I don't have a problem. I've got one guy in my department that's got like a flag. But I told him, from the meeting last week, starting Monday, they would be covered up.
So when you say law enforcement chief, you take somebody in CID, for example. Sometimes tattoos part of their job.
There is always an option in every law enforcement agency that I've known anywhere all across this country. There are sometimes, if they are working in certain non-specific
Yeah.
functions that we won't really get into, and there's a difference in the appearance they can have. They can have facial hair. The hair can be longer. Those are understood. When it's time for them to come back in a blue suit, they got to come back and conform.
Gotcha.
That's a little bit different situation.
We just want to make it, when the staff addresses something, it's starting, it takes a lot for staff to come to aldermans or elected officials, because it's so much up and down and controversy. So when they do come to you, you just want to bring it to the attention of the board members, and just so they see you're making an attempt. And they may come to you with something real serious one day. Tattoos, is this a number 10 on our most wanted list? No, it's not. But we may have a staff member one day come to us with something that's real serious that affects the city's, bottom line or operation or anything. And that's one of the main reasons why I brought it to the board tonight. And I really appreciate everyone chiming in on the conversation.
I'd like to say one thing too before we close on that. I think when you're talking to the fire chief and you're talking to the police chief and you're talking to Parks and Recs or whoever, I think what we should do is there should be a general policy within personnel when we hire the individual, and I think the department head. You can always strengthen the policy, they just can't take away from it. And what the chief is saying, he's strengthening the department, he's strengthening the policy that's already on hand. Tattoos should not be obscene and in keeping with professional image, and possibly, when possible, should not be visible. Chief Clark is taking care of that. So, I think that we should yield on the expertise of the department head and let them make that decision on what they think that they should do. The other thing, a little bit of history, at one point in our armed forces, only the Navy could have tattoos. They could only have an anchor, and it had to be hidden. Army couldn't get it because you'd get an Article 15 if they caught you with it. Now, Army, Navy, Air Force, everybody can get a tattoo. So things change, and you have to change with the times. And as far as what's offensive, I'm quite sure I'm offending someone just by breathing air and standing here, sitting here today. So you're not going to be able to appease everybody. If that department head and that individual can sit and discuss what the situation is, I think those are the two that will take care of what the city's requirements are, and I think that should go where it needs to go. But we don't need to get up here. Well, first of all, even if we vote against it, is the city going to pay to remove them? Are we going to pay each? We can't fire the employee. Are we going to pay to remove the employee's tattoos? So
Well, I don't think it's the fact that they had tattoos. I think it was the long sleeve shirts and 98
No,
degree
we
weather.
pay for the long sleeve uniform and the sleeves also.
That's probably true in you two's department, but then what about David McGowan and his guys that are out there building walls, doing maintenance, mowing? I don't know. I've never mowed in long sleeves in my life. I don't have any tattoos to cover up, but even if I did, I really wouldn't want to mow in long sleeves. Michael Dietz and his crew, you guys are working on the water sewer, how...
addressed ours this morning because I've been out of the loop for a little while, but we're going by this policy here. If you've got it, as of tomorrow, it needs to be covered up until further notice. We had thought about purchasing some sleeves for the guys, but then we thought, if we go that route, and somebody comes in with one on their foot, are we gonna have to purchase something additional for them? So the way we're approaching it is, if you wanna wear a sleeve, purchase it yourself, the city provides you a long sleeve uniform. But we're pretty much going by that until further notice, because I feel like we all have to be on the same page, because whatever I do has to be consistent with what's going on across town, or that's when we're gonna get ourselves in trouble.
And just for the record, Chief Clark has a pink unicorn on his back. It's like this big, so that's...
So at this point, we're working on getting that. This is part of the personnel policy that's already being drafted. And as soon as we have that back for this board, everyone will have a copy and be able to make and suggest any changes before we adopt it.
I think it's a good discussion. I know a lot of people,
Just a joke, please.
I know a lot of people
Disclaimer.
have tattoos, and it's a way of life. I think it's a good discussion. If we can come up with something in the middle to meet David and Garland's crew as opposed to Chief Walker's crew, I think it would be great, but I guess we'll wait on the,
Just so that I know, if it's small enough, a bandage is okay, right? That still counts as a cover, right?
We've had people to wear wristbands, sweatbands. We've had people to do different things. We address different hazards. You don't want to put something that's not somewhat flame resistant or any of those kind of things. Now, like I said, they can take those uniform shirts off if they're going to a fire. We don't have no problem with that. I really don't want them on there if they have long sleeves. But as a city, I'll be honest with you, I'm glad you're addressing this because this has been a debate. They think that I'm a horrible person for making them cover their tattoos.
There are actually polls in some of the businesses. I don't know if you guys have seen them out in Laverne, but if you go to certain businesses, and they're good businesses, I shop them frequently, and there's polls where you sign, is it okay for fire and police to wear short sleeve with tattoos, yes or no? I mean, that's what's happening in our community.
It's been a very, I would say, healthy debate at our fire hall.
It's been good.
They see other fire departments doing the same. We're more strict. I will promise you, though, our personnel, no matter what they do, are going to be professional. They're going to look professional, and we're not going to be dressed tacky or any of those kind of things. First impressions are lasting impressions. So I think the chief is the same way. We're not going to have tacky departments. Now, if you address and let the tattoos go, that's fine. But they're still going to be in their uniforms when the time comes.
Thank you, Chief Clark. Moving on to mayor and alderman comments. Alderman Church.
I would like to talk a little bit about the Tennessee Strikers. We had a wonderful meeting today with the interim director of Parks and Rec, Miss Felicia there, Felicia Anderson with purchasing, myself, and Michael Davis. There's been a lot of back and forth with the community and the misinterpretation on what's going on with our ball leagues. So they were generous enough to have a meeting with me today, and I feel it was very productive. The four of us sat in there for about, 2 hours, David? It was a two-hour meeting. We got to speak to Michael, and I believe, after having conversation with the gentleman, he's sincere about making this work in our community. And he has a lot of his own personal money that he's put into his program, the nonprofit center. He's bought some bases for our parks. Pitching mounds. I mean, these things cost thousands of dollars. He spent $5,000 out of his own pocket. So I had some hardships with him going into the meeting because my child plays in the ball leagues, and we have wonderful coaches, and we've done a lot of without the coaches, we wouldn't survive. I believe it is going to turn, and we're going to be heading in a better direction. The four of us have really taken the responsibility of, if it fails, we fail as a city. We fail as a community if the program isn't successful. So at one time, there was 800, 900 kids, 1,100 kids on our ball fields. And, those numbers are 25% now on a good day. So it's important that as a board member, we give them a chance. And as a parent and a dad, when you look in the back seat to your 5-year-old and you tell them, well, this is why this is not happening, this is why this is not happening, when they ask you questions, you have to do it with a perspective of not everything going on in the community is a negative. And it's important for me to understand that, for one, and the community to understand. We had some problems with the concession stands not being open. Well, I questioned that today. He said, well, we had one game scheduled, and if we don't have multiple games scheduled, he loses money, the nonprofit loses money operating the concession stand because he pays the staff. So no one in their right business practices is going to operate something that's in a negative, with a negative return. So we're going to work on scheduling with Parks and Rec, and with the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. We're going to try to come up with some ideas and ship to you guys, because that's your baby. And hopefully, with Alderman No leading the way, we're going to make it work. This organization, the Tennessee Strikers, I believe they're here for the long haul. I seen it in his eyes today. He's very sincere, and he doesn't want to go anywhere. And there's so much misinformation out there, which we've all felt it as elected officials. But when it affects someone's livelihood, when people create rumors or people say, hey, this is going on, don't go there, go to Smyrna, go here because it's so bad, they really need to come out and eat a hot dog at the ball game. If you come out and watch them, you'll see they have the drive. You'll see these kids doing the best they can do. You'll see the coaches. We have coaches that they don't have any children playing in the leagues, and they're coaching. I mean, how long has it been since you heard that? We have law enforcement officers that work their shift and then leave their shift and go get on the field and work with these kids. So it's real important, and I hope with addressing this tonight, the citizens that have contacted me, they see that we hear you, we hear your complaints. Now we want you to hear us, and we want you to work with us now. We've addressed the complaints, and now it's back in the citizens' hands. We have to go back with them and say, hey, this is what we're going to do to correct it, and let's give this group a chance. And I feel with this administration, they're going to have the right tools, and with David running things over there, I think I've seen 2 hours of conversation. A guy that was thrown into the wolf pack, and he stayed in there, and he's definitely going to help us get there. That's all I have. Thank you.
Alderman Jones.
Nothing.
Alderman No.
I just wanted to tell David, my condolences. I know you've heard it 1,000 times about your mom. I didn't know the lady, but from what I've heard, she was a tough old lady, buddy. So my condolences. I know it was bittersweet.
Vice Mayor Brown.
Just want to wish everyone a happy 4th of July, happy Independence Day. God bless America. I'm really glad that we have policies where we can have a little bit of fireworks fun. And I request everyone to be a little respectful of your neighbors. I mean, I love fireworks. I love to watch them. I love to see them. I know the kids love to play them. But just keep in mind, we do have an ordinance about what time a fireworks stops. So don't be that guy. And if you're a neighbor that goes to bed before that time, I'm really sorry, but it is going to be one of those nights because we have an ordinance that allows it, and so it'll be done. But as a reminder, a lot of times on 4th of July weekend have people calling to complain before the noise ordinance goes into effect at night, which makes our dispatchers and our police department really busy when they could be responding to more urgent matters. So I just want everybody to have a good, healthy, happy 4th of July, and please be respectful of your neighbors. Thank you.
Just to piggyback off that, please do not call 911 about fireworks. Call the non-emergency line if you're calling. That I'm sure Chief will greatly appreciate that. A couple things to remind everyone about. Movies in the Park is tomorrow night, so be sure to check out Veterans Memorial Park. We will have a swinging good time down there. Starting July 1st, Hands Free Tennessee. You've seen the images online, on TV, and print. Goes into effect July 1st, where it's hands-free for your phones. So please make sure that you're aware of this, because police will be on the lookout for it. And then just want to say thank you to everybody, whether it was directors, boards, Bruce, Phyllis, the whole Board of Mayor and Aldermen, to get the budget passed on Monday. One thing that I'm very proud of, this board has stayed away from the current trend of raising taxes and even our water sewer rates. You're seeing that in the news quite a bit with Rutherford County and with other cities. With our budget, there is no tax increase, there's no water sewer increase, which is great for our residents. So again, thank you everybody who's worked so hard on the budget. With that, call this meeting adjourned.